MLA Citations, part of the How to Write an Essay series. Why do we use citations in our work? To avoid plagiarism, and to give the original writers credit for their original work. Well then, why do we use other people's work? To back up our main points, to support our arguments, to add credibility, and to add expert support or opinions. And sometimes, we use them specifically to examine, analyze, or refute. Before we get too far, let's discuss the differences between primary and secondary sources. First, we'll look at primary sources. Primary sources provide direct evidence to support your argument. They most often come in the form of original documents, such as the very famous Bill of Rights. First-hand testimony or accounts, such as interviews or fieldwork. And original research, specifically conducted by you, the author, such as surveys or scientific experiments. Now we'll look at secondary sources. Secondary sources add credibility to your arguments. They report, analyze, and/or interpret information from other sources, usually primary. Generally speaking, most of your research will come from secondary sources. There are many different types of secondary sources. A few of the most common include books, journals, websites, online publications, newspapers, magazines, documentaries, reports, and many more. Anytime you encounter a source you intend to include in your paper, you want to evaluate it for relevance and reliability. When checking for relevance, be sure that the information is useful to your argument. Note that related does not mean relevant. It is possible for something to be related to your arguments without being relevant. Be sure not to confuse the two. Information that is not relevant does not belong in your paper. When checking for reliability, be sure that the information is trustworthy, accurate, and comes from a dependable source. Information that is not reliable does not belong in your paper. Here are a few questions you can ask yourself to test a source for relevance. Does the source address your topic? Does the source support or convey your viewpoint? Is the source up to date? For example, citing cancer research from 1892 is probably a little outdated and therefore not very relevant. Here are a few questions you can ask yourself to test the reliability of a source. Where did you find the source? An accredited university's research library, or is it someone's personal blog? Is the author credible? Is the author an expert on your topic? What is the author's viewpoint or bias? Is the author being objective and fair as opposed to prejudiced or unreasonable? Does the source have a sponsor? A lot of times, you'll find that websites have specific sponsors noted at the bottom of the page, and this can be very telling. A website arguing the inefficiency of solar power might be a bit biased if sponsored by a major oil company, for example. Note that Wikipedia is not considered a reliable source. This is because anyone can write or edit articles on Wikipedia, regardless of knowledge, viewpoint, or bias. This means that there is no way to accurately judge the reliability of the information. That said, while you can't cite Wikipedia, it can be a good starting point for background knowledge on your subject. If you find something you want to cite, try to find another credible source that verifies the information and cite that source instead. Once you've verified your sources are relevant and reliable, you'll need to learn how to work them into your paper and properly cite them. There are two main types of quotes. The first, direct quotes, are an exact copy of the original text. The next, indirect quotes, are restatements of the author's ideas in your own words, such as in a paraphrase or summary, each of which we'll discuss in a moment. Both direct and indirect quotes require citations to avoid plagiarism. So let's look at citing a source. For every source in your paper, you'll have two types of citations: in-text citations and end-of-text citations, also called the works cited model. In-text citations generally take the form of the author's last name and the page number of the citation, separated by only a single space and enclosed between a pair of parentheses. End-of-text citations appear on your works cited page and generally resemble the following format. The three most common works cited models are a book, a scholarly journal, and a website. Take a look at the models for each. Most of your end-of-text citations will be some variation of one of these three. Here are some examples of each. But what do you do if the source doesn't fit into one of those models? First, check your handbook. Your handbook is filled with all kinds of specific source scenarios, such as how to handle a source with more than one author, or with an anonymous author. It also contains many less common citation models, such as DVDs or audio recordings. If the handbook doesn't contain exactly what you're looking for, your best bet is to use a similar model and adapt it to fit your source, adding or omitting information as necessary. Another option is to try an online search for the citation model, or try one of the many auto-formatting websites. Since I brought it up, let's talk for a moment about auto-formatting websites. There are certain websites, such as citationmachine.net or easybib.com, that will let you input your source data and automatically format it for you. Is it okay to use these websites? Well, in many ways, these websites are similar to using calculators in your math classes. As long as your instructor doesn't mind, they're okay to use as a shortcut, but you should know how to work without them. The best answer is that you should always ask permission from your instructor before using these websites, so you aren't accused of cheating if your instructor doesn't allow them by chance. That said, I think you'll find many instructors don't have a problem with these sites as long as you're upfront about using them. Here are some things to remember when working with direct quotes. Direct quotes require quotation marks. They should be kept short, they should be integrated into your paper, and they are most commonly used in the following ways: for expressing particularly vivid, bold, or inventive language, when the quote directly reinforces your idea, when examining the exact words for interpretation, or when the quote is actually an illustration, graph, diagram, or table. Let's take a look at an example of a direct quote. For our examples, we'll look at a literature student's paper written about the novels of a prestigious author named Toni Morrison. A veteran of war named Shadrach also has a few of the archetypal wise woman characteristics. Shadrach, who seemingly lost his mind in the war, is the founder of National Suicide Day, a day on which, in order to avoid the fear of the unexpected, everybody could get it out of the way and the rest of the year would be safe and free. Shadrach, despite his madness, displays moments of inspirational insight and wisdom. From the quotation marks, we know that the quote, "Everybody could get it out of the way and the rest of the year would be safe and free," are not the student's words, but instead the words of another author. In this case, the in-text citation tells us they are the words of another author with the last name of Morrison from page 14 of her book. Notice the period goes at the end of the citation. Here's an example where the author is named in the text and therefore left out of the in-text citation. Again, we can easily identify the quote because of the quotation marks. And because the author's name is mentioned in the text before the quote, we can leave it out of the in-text citation. Our last example comes in the form of a block quote. Use a block quote when you need to quote a large portion of text. You should typically block quote any quote 4 lines or longer. You should only use block quotes when absolutely necessary and not just to waste space. Notice that the block quotes are offset from the left margin by a full inch, but go all the way to the right margin. They are not centered. Also, note that they do not require quotations and that the citation is at the end of the block quote. Because block quotes can take up a lot of space with writing other than your own, a good rule of thumb is to extend your minimum page count by the length of your block quotes. So for example, if you have a half a page of block quotes, make your paper half a page longer than the minimum requirement. This way, your teacher will not think you're trying to shortchange your assignment. This rule may not apply if there's a page maximum, however, in which case you should ask your instructor how they want you to handle the situation. Here's an example of a properly formatted Works Cited page. Notice the entries are double-spaced, arranged alphabetically by author's last name, and indented a half inch every line after the first. Here are some things to remember when working with indirect quotes, such as paraphrases and summaries. Indirect quotes do not require quotation marks. Indirect quotes state the author's original idea in your own words. And like direct quotes, indirect quotes always need to be cited. When paraphrasing, remember to use your own words, keep the paraphrase about equal in length to the original explanation, include an in-text citation at the end of the paraphrase. When summarizing, always remember to use your own words and voice, condense the author's idea, and keep your explanation significantly shorter than the original. Explain how the writer's idea relates to yours. Cite the source with an in-text citation. Now on to the do nots. When paraphrasing or summarizing, do not change, add, or delete from the author's original meaning. Do not simply replace words with synonyms from the thesaurus or flip-flop grammatical clauses. Do not lose track of the original source and forget to cite. Doing any of the aforementioned would be considered plagiarism. So what don't you need to cite? You don't need to cite general knowledge. General knowledge is anything the general public should already know, or anything that should be easily accessible to the general public. Examples of general knowledge include that Charles Darwin wrote On the Origin of Species, that the Denver Broncos are an NFL football team, that copper is an element on the periodic table. Info that's not general knowledge includes a commentary on Darwin's On the Origin of Species, former Denver Bronco John Elway's total passing yard stat, the chemical makeup of chlorophyll. Sometimes it's hard to know what should be considered general knowledge. If you're not sure, cite it. Thanks for watching the video on MLA Citations. Until next time.